We're going to be interacting with that a lot today, and we'll hopefully see some really eye-opening things. Now let's see what the Watchtower actually says about the New World Translation. In one of their articles, they say this: in times past, Bible readers of one religion were suspicious of translations made by another religious group. Such distrust is generally unwarranted, claims theologian C. Houtman in the scholarly Dutch Theological Magazine. After reviewing these translations, his opinion is that only rarely can passages be found that reflect the translator's denominational or political and social viewpoint. While for the most part this is true, there are some cases in which Bible translators have let their religious bias show through their renderings. Yet if someone deliberately changes or omits part of the contents of the Bible, he is on dangerous ground. As one Bible book warns, if anyone takes anything away from the words of the scroll of this prophecy, God will take his portion away from the trees of life. Alright, so the Watchtower is saying you've got to be careful when reading Bibles from other religious groups, because sometimes even the most well-intentioned translators can let their theological biases seep into the text. And they say that if you let that happen, you're playing a dangerous game. Revelation 22:19 says you're not allowed to take anything away from the Bible. And actually the verse right before that, if you read the passage, says you're not allowed to add anything either. So you can't add and you can't take away, or you'll face the judgment of God. And then in their reasonings from the scripture book, which is kind of like a quick reference, like an FAQ, we read this: what kind of translation is this? For one thing, it is an accurate, largely literal translation from the original languages. It is not a loose paraphrase in which the translators leave out details that they consider unimportant and add ideas that they believe will be helpful. So the Watchtower is basically saying, you can trust our Bible. We're not going to take anything away, and we're also not going to add our own ideas into the text, even if we think they're helpful ideas. It's just going to be an accurate, literal translation from the original Greek. And that's the claim that we're going to be examining today as we get into our main subject matter, starting right now. So this is what their interlinear looks like. You can see here that in gray we have the original Greek. That's the language that the New Testament was first written in. And then right above it we have the English equivalent for each word. This actually comes from John chapter 15, and this is how the Watchtower translates it. It's Jesus speaking, and he says, I am the vine, you the branches. The one remaining in me and I in him, this one is bearing fruit much, because apart from me, not you are able to be doing nothing. And by the way, if it sounds a little jumbled, it's because Greek is written in a slightly different order than we would in English. That's a common thing when you deal with translations, but hopefully you can still make sense of it. Then in verse 6, if ever not anyone be remaining in me, he was thrown outside as the branch, and he was dried up, and they are leading together them, and into the fire they are throwing, and it is being burned. If ever you should remain in me, and the sayings of me and you should remain, which if ever you may be willing to ask. Okay, so it's a little bit clunky, but I actually think the Watchtower did a pretty good job of translating this. In fact, you probably recognize it as the story where Jesus claims to be the vine, and he encourages us to abide in him in the way that branches abide in the vine. So it's pretty accurate here. But then, when they went to go publish this into their actual Bible, something strange happened. I wonder if you can pick up on it. Here's how it reads in the New World Translation today. Whoever remains in union with me, and I in union with him, this one bears much fruit. If anyone does not remain in union with me, he is thrown out like a branch and dries up. If you remain in union with me, and my sayings remain in you, ask whatever you wish. Alright, so what's different about that passage now? Well, I've made it pretty easy. They've actually added the words union with 4 separate times in those verses. So the question to be asked here is, where are those words, union with, in the actual interlinear? And again, just to make it easy, I'm going to circle the places where you should be looking. Now feel free to study that as long as you need to, but hopefully you can see that those words, union with, are nowhere in the original Greek. So the Watchtower translated it correctly for the interlinear, but when it came time to put it in the Bible, they suddenly started making some additions to it. That's a little peculiar. But I wonder if you've noticed, in verse 7, there's another occurrence of the phrase, in you, and in that instance, they actually render it consistently over there in verse 7 in the translation. Now, why would they keep the translation consistent in that? And because we believe that, we also believe that he's omnipresent. That is, he's present everywhere. And because of that, he is able to indwell all believers all over the world at the same time. But in Jehovah's Witness theology, Jesus is just an angel. He can't do that. And so, in order to make the passage consistent with their theology, they've had to insert the words union with in all those places that talk about Christ dwelling within believers and vice versa. But in verse 7, it's talking about the sayings of Christ. Well, they do believe that the sayings of Christ can be in us, and so they've translated it correctly in that verse. You can see how this sort of looks like they're actually allowing their own theological biases to affect the translation. But I don't want to draw too much too soon. This is just the first example. I think this next example is even more telling. This comes from Romans chapter 8. It's one of my favorite chapters in the whole Bible. And here Paul writes, "You, but not you, are in flesh, but in spirit, if even Spirit of God is dwelling in you." Take note of that phrase, and then let's look down at verse 10. "If but Christ in you, the indeed body dead through sin, but the spirit life through righteousness." All right, so take a look at both of those phrases there. We're dealing with two identical translations. Both of them say "in you," and even in Greek there, if you want to look at that letter by letter, it's the same Greek phrase in both cases. It's pronounced "in humin" if you're interested. Now, in Watchtower theology, they don't have a problem with God's Spirit dwelling in you. They believe that that's possible, but as we've seen, they don't believe that Christ can dwell in you. And so based on what we saw on the last slide, what would you guess that they would do to this passage when it comes time to put it in the actual Bible? Well, I think you're exactly right. Here's how it reads in the New World Translation. "However, you are in harmony not with the flesh, but with the Spirit, if God's Spirit truly dwells in you." All right, so they've got that correct. "But if anyone does not have Christ's Spirit, this person does not belong to him. But if Christ is in union with you, the body is dead because of sin, but the spirit is life because of righteousness." So again, we've got these two identical Greek phrases that are translated correctly in the interlinear, but when they transfer that over into the New World Translation, suddenly you start seeing some funny inconsistencies. So the question to be asked here is, why is the New World Translation adding these ideas into the text when they promised us that they wouldn't do that, and more importantly,